Tonight, a U.S. drone strike killing an American held hostage by Al-Qaeda. The president's apologized, but the fallout, it's just starting. Then new controversy about Carl Hastie and how he profited from his mother's embezzlement. The more we learn about the case, the more questions it raises. Also, Republicans continue to hammer Hillary over foreign donations to the Clinton Foundation. For her part, she says it's all part of a right-wing conspiracy. Is she right, or is this one legit? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We're going to have that, as well as a moving conversation I have with the mother of one of the children lost at Sandy Hook, and she's doing something with the foundation to try and make sure future tragedies like that don't happen again. That conversation coming up later in the hour. But we start tonight with the drone strike on the Pakistani-Afghanistan border that targeted an Al-Qaeda compound. But while taking out some Al-Qaeda targets, it also mistakenly killed two hostages, including an American named Warren Weinstein and also an Italian named Giovanni Laporto. And this happened back in January, and we're just hearing about it today. And earlier today, an emotional President Obama had this to say.
I take full responsibility for all our counterterrorism operations, including the one that inadvertently took the lives of Warren and Giovanni. I profoundly regret what happened. On behalf of the United States government, I offer our deepest apologies to the families.
Now, the attack also killed Ahmad Farouk. He's an American citizen who became an Al-Qaeda operative. Adam Gaddan, you may remember him. He also an American. He became an Al-Qaeda leader and was also killed in the same region, but under a separate attack. Now, officials say the operation did not intentionally target those two American Al-Qaeda members. They said they were simply trying to take out terrorist compounds. And they're also saying they didn't know that Weinstein was at the compound that in fact was hit. President Obama didn't say why it took 3 months to disclose the death of the hostages, but he did say the government is investigating this incident to make sure something like this does not happen again. All right, let's bring in our panel. I'm joined, of course, by Dominic Carr, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. Richard Brodsky, shockingly, is tardy tonight. All right.
You didn't have to shame him.
Oh, absolutely. He threw him under the bus at the first chance. He'd do worse to us. All right. It was interesting. I've heard a lot of dialogue this afternoon, guys, from senior military folks, retired generals, etc. And I've also heard from some Republicans, including Peter King, who you think would take the first opportunity to say, oh, this was administration trying to put it under the rug here. They're the gang who couldn't shoot straight. They didn't know this. But I saw a lot of tempered, sober-minded folks. Now, there's been some folks on the Hill that have already gone on the attack, but they've said, basically, when you're a hostage, they hide you underground, in effect. They're not putting you out because they know what's happened with the drone strikes. So you're making a calculated gamble when you know that this is a terrorist compound, or you believe it to be, and you believe there to be targets inside. When you take that calculated gamble and that strike, you know you're doing it blindly, and this is with a drone, which is what America wants. America doesn't want armed troops on the ground. This is unfortunately some of the casualties of war that come along with it. To me, I get it, but is that too much of a trade-off that we're willing to do here in the 21st century warfare, including, you know, missile-guided targets and drones?
But you've got to fight the battle against terrorists, and it's my belief that I would rather the battle be fought there than here. And what I mean by that, Richard, what you're referring to, I believe the military folks call it the signature drone attacks, where you don't have a specific target. It's where they're looking at the site for months at a time, and they believe it's terrorist activity. But I mean, what other options are there? If you don't have the definitive information based on the CIA, and you only believe that there's terrorist activity occurring there, I mean, they have had success more often. It's very unfortunate what happened here in terms of Americans losing their lives. But what other options?
It does point out a couple of different concerns, though. One is that we have such terrible on-the-ground intelligence in Pakistan and in Afghanistan.
And by the way, we give the Pakistanis $2 billion in aid.
Right.
It's about time we get something for our money.
Well, but I mean, we would have had bin Laden years earlier if we had better intelligence, and this is just the latest indication. It also is a reminder of just how indiscriminate these drone attacks can be. And I'm not condemning this drone attack by any means. I think These guys were unfortunately collateral damage, and I think most Americans are going to be willing to, look, if there's a hostage standoff in Nebraska and you storm the building, and in the process of trying to free them, a couple of hostages are killed. For the most part, I think Americans are willing to make that trade-off in a terrible situation like that. So when you go overseas, you go to Pakistan, you go to Afghanistan, it's unfortunate, but I think most people are going to be okay. But it does remind you that these drone strikes are not precise target or
You also
weapons of
raised
war.
the second part of this issue, which isn't getting as much discussion today, but we did kill 2 Americans on foreign soil. Now, these are 2 very bad guys, so let me be clear. I'm not losing a scintilla of sleep over the fact that these guys are no longer here. Clearly enemy combatants, clearly not only aiding and abetting the enemy, but did atrocious things. Court cases have kind of already established this as letter law, that if they are basically established as enemy combatants, you can kill Americans on foreign soil. But it does raise some interesting questions.
It does, and keep in mind, we're talking about a guy who ripped up his passport in a video as a recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda. So I'm with you on this. Enemy combatant, they were clearly on the battlefield as the battlefield is constituted these days. But there is a larger question, which is the U.S. government is not allowed to execute people without due process, without finding them, charging them with a crime. Americans, yeah. Giving them a fair trial, and then figuring out what the determination is supposed to be. Look, if you go back to like the old school battles that we remember from the Revolutionary War, where people are lined up in a field and shooting at each other, if there's an American on the wrong side of the line, you shoot that guy because he's going to shoot you.
But do you feel that way, or do you understand the argument, what you just articulated, even if one of these guys is one of bin Laden's spokesmen?
No. What I'm saying is it's clear that he's on the other side of that battle line, and if he's pointing a gun at you, you shoot him. I mean, that's the rules of war. If somebody's about to harm the United States, you take action. There's nothing you can do about that. But it does open Pandora's box, which is if somebody's less involved, if somebody's less a figurehead for Al-Qaeda than these guys were, if the evidence is a little bit less clear than it was in these cases, then you've got a problem. And we had that problem with the accidental killing, I think, in Yemen. There was one guy that was pretty clear he was involved in the battle, but then there was his son, who I think was 16 or 17 at the time, and that's where you've got a problem, because then you're killing Americans without due process.
On foreign soil, or for that matter, back here domestically. It's going to be interesting how this plays out. I think Republicans got to be careful here, because this is usually the kind of military action they like out of a president. They like to be proactive when it comes to military affairs, shoot first, ask questions later in many ways as it relates with the enemy. I'll be curious to the criticism of the president, specifically about this drone strike. Take the American, person on the ground out of it, but I'm talking about the hostage. If they take a shot, it does have a veil of hypocrisy, because we didn't hear the stuff in the Bush years.
Well, Richard, so far, I haven't seen them taking a shot on this issue.
One California Republican, House Republican, said that there was.
But I'm talking about leadership.
Yeah, fair enough.
Susan Collins was a little bit concerned about it, but for the most part, the big name Republicans
and Duncan Hunter, in fact,
have been
who sits on intelligence, also.
But most of the big name Republicans have been fairly supportive of the White House in this incident, and for good reason, because you're dealing with the war on terror, and I think they do walk a fine line if they're too critical of the president in a spot like this. I also don't think this really changes the game too much when it comes to the use of drones overall.
But
most Americans want this kind of action.
It happened in January, right? And it's not that I think we got to know everything every second, but the one reality we start to learn out of drone strikes is we didn't even know who was in the building. We do the drone strike. It's not like we even have assets on the ground who can then go in and tell us who we even got. We learned about this. The government learned about this long after the strikes itself. It just tells you that as much as we all want remote control wars, there's also stuff that comes along with it, including the fog of war and also the unanswered questions about where are you shooting and who are you shooting.
So when you hear complaints on the ground in Pakistan or Afghanistan that we accidentally targeted a wedding party, whether we accidentally targeted a group of civilians, to my mind, this adds credence to those claims. I think a lot of cases, people after the fact are fudging it a little bit and trying to make us look bad, but these are very imprecise weapons, and people who have nothing to do with the battle are going to get caught up in it.
But if you ask people, if you're going to, in the fight on terrorists,
Go
you want to
ask
put American
5 out of
troops
5
back on, you want to use
Americans.
drones? They're
Right.
picking drones, right?
Right.
All right, when we come back, everyone, we'll get a little closer to home. New questions about the controversy surrounding Carl Hastie and the money he made after his mother was convicted of embezzlement. The question is, you know, and I'll give Dom credit. We're talking about first guessing at this table. This isn't after the fact. Why were Democrats in such a rush to make Hastie the next speaker, even pushing up the date where he basically would have been formally appointed to the role? This after Shelley Silver was indicted. Plus, that again, my emotional conversation with a woman who lost her son at Sandy Hook. She's pushing for new legislation to help educate kids in the hopes it could avert another tragedy like we saw at the Connecticut school.